We have a lot of means to diversify our portfolio, but we don't see a need to because we are blessed, and that's the problem. Nigeria has it all. We are too blessed to be effective, and that's why we're suffering. Hey guys, welcome back to Madness in Nigeria Living, and I'm your host Gesi. And once again, welcome back. See, today's episode, we're working on a premise. How can we make Nigeria better? And by better, I mean better in an economical sense. I think this is a thought process a lot of people have had. There are multiple ways we might have conceived for that to happen. One of the ways would be Nigeria was never amalgamated. Then maybe northern Nigeria's and southern Nigeria will be separated and we'll have different institutions. And these different institutions will lead to a more successful northern and southern Nigeria. We are already amalgamated, so too late for that. But when I was thinking about this here, I'll come back to why I'm making this episode. But when I was thinking about this, something that came to my mind was, what if we had earthquake? That sometimes I just feel Nigeria needs a natural disaster. Yes, that's what I'm saying. And I will expand on why I do think Nigeria needed a natural disaster to be a better country. But to go back to why I'm making this episode, I was having a conversation with a friend and she's just moving into a new apartment. So she was complaining about cost of setting up the new apartment. And I was like, yeah, the paint she was complaining about, I do know that paint is more expensive now. So it's not like they are shitting up per se. It's just things are way more expensive. And I'm like, it can only get worse. After I wrote that, I paused to think about it. Why am I thinking it can only get worse? And I highlighted it to her that that's what I'm thinking. Like, why am I thinking that? And she said she feels the same way too, that you feel Nigeria can get worse and it get worse. So I started thinking, if our expectation of it getting worse will only make it worse. In my episode where I lightly talked about the inflation, I talked about our own expectation from the Nigeria story. It's one reason it's getting worse. So going back to why I said we might have needed some form of natural disaster is this. The biggest problem with Nigeria is our over-reliance on petroleum. It makes up the vast majority of our revenue. It also makes up the vast majority of our exportation. And our over-reliance on petroleum is one reason Nigeria has the fastest shrinking GDP in the world. Our GDP has gone down more than 50% since 2014. And what caused it majorly was the fall in the price of fuel, 1 barrel of oil. Now, see the thing. If we are overly reliant on something that is supposed to be black good, and that's why our economy is worse, why am I saying the possibility of maybe earthquake or volcano would have made us a better country? In a fictional Nigeria that will have earthquakes, I'm arguing that fictional Nigeria would be better than the one we have right now. And the premise is coming from the viewpoint of institution. The winners of this year Nobel Prize for Economics proved that a stable institution leads to better economy, quite literally for the first time, sort of legitimizing the benefit of a democracy. Now, Nigeria is lacking in good institutions. One of the reasons why we're lacking in good institutions here is short-sightedness. So, in the Nigeria that would have earthquake or volcano, I'm arguing there will be a need for better institution. And the reason is this. If I am in a country here that I'm scared of the very next day my house will be destroyed completely or a volcano will just wipe out my whole town, I would be a little bit more concerned for a stable government that if something like that happens, what are the things in place to make us come back from that? That stability over time would affect the way we look at our politics. And now I'm arguing that if we had grown up in that kind of country, we would have stabilized better, because Nigeria is not stable. And we're not stable for one. The unstable government is beneficial to some certain people. Now, to go back to why I said our institutions are lacking here, look at it this way. Of all the countries that were colonized by the Europeans, pure correlation, everyone that had a good economy before the Europeans came are poorer now compared to the ones that didn't. Yeah, there are some tiny details. For example, Australia and USA technically no longer have the indigenous people, whereas we still are made up of our indigenous people 99%. But see the thing here, when the Europeans came to environment that had resources, they established an institution that was there to control the resources as opposed to create new resources. And that's why I said if we have natural disasters, our institution will be slightly different. Now, if you go back to the colonial masters, when you created these institutions was very good for controlling the masses. And when they finally left and we gained independence, it made more sense for a bad government to come in than for a good government. I'll say the reason why. If the order in place is to control the masses and the people on top benefit the vast majority of money from it, then being a strong man that will just take control and take power is just what the system is begging you to be. It makes lesser sense to go for a more egalitarian society. With that in mind, and with this known, why is our institution still like that? It's simple. Our institution is still like that because, for one, the people in power benefit from it, which is no surprise. But more so than that, because we know the system is broken, we ourselves just have the same mindset. If you think I'm lying, ask the vast majority of Nigeria. If you're a president today, will you steal money? I've asked this question. I've been asking this question for years. I've only met one person that said he was not going to steal money. And I'll tell you, the moment he said it, every other person in the room was like, just make me minister, I will steal on your behalf. That's the funniest thing about our situation. In criminology, there's a term for it, the broken glass theory or the broken window theory, which is, the analogy goes something like this. If there's a building with a broken window and people pass that building over and over again, it creates the idea that this building is not properly managed, which increases the chances of someone trying to break into the building to steal other things. It's the burglary mindset that now comes after seeing that the window is broken. So the idea is, when an institution is seen as bad, it's easier to incentivize people to create more crime, to commit more crime and do more for the negative than for the positive. And it's simple. If you feel like the government is not going to pay you well, your salary is not stable, it makes more sense to take bribe. That's why we see our lecturers take a lot of bribes. We see our police take a lot of bribes. It makes more sense that way. And the same way, because it makes more sense to take bribe, it also makes more sense to put a president or a governor in power that is more likely to bribe you than otherwise. And this all stems from the fact that our institution in place is for power to be held by the people on top and to control the masses. Can that change in our lifetime? Of course it can. But it can only happen with an open conversation about these things, about how our institution is set up. And one of the ways that open conversation can go is, what do we do after elections? See, for a lot of people here that I know, when I say a lot of people, I mean just a lot of people I know, they supported Peter Obi. Now, after Tinubu won the election, a lot of people removed themselves from the political discourse. We don't know what policies is putting in place, and any policy that is being proposed by this current government, we just feel like it's something bad happening. And because we expect something bad to happen, if you own a store and you expect something bad to happen, you will increase the prices of your goods. You will increase the prices of your services, and it will keep on pushing everything up just because of the expectation. How can we change that? It's not something the individual man can change. the government has to have an incentive to change that. But for one, like I already mentioned, the government already gained more from doing the negative than doing the positive. So am I saying there's no change that can be done? There is a lot of change that can be done. Like I said, a lot of people, when we vote for a particular candidate and that candidate doesn't, we remove ourselves from the political discourse, which is not a good thing. But see something here. Tinubu is currently trying to propose a tax reform bill. And when I first saw the bill was stated like Tinubu is finding new ways to take money from poor people. And general reaction, price of things started going up immediately. And a lot of people just started complaining. But on further reassessment of the bills, and the more I read about the bills, the more I went to the tiny details, it became evident that the bill is actually very beneficial for poorer Nigerians. For one, about 70% of the Nigerian population would quite literally not pay personal tax again. And these are the kind of tiny details. Even people in IT spaces will not pay personal tax. These are the kind of tiny details that is beneficial for the individual. There's a lot of details that is also beneficial for small businesses. But the most interesting part of the reform is the value-added tax. The value-added tax currently is being shared based on the size and population fairly across all states, regardless of where the tax was generated from. But the bill proposed kind of changes that and puts more money back in the state that generates the value-added tax. What that does is, if you come from a state that has high economical activities, you generate more tax, more of that money goes back to the state. It incentivizes the governors of those states to want to generate more money. That kind of long-sighted policies is the kind of policies we want our politicians to make, regardless of whether we support that politicians. And that's why I felt I need to highlight it. We need to look at these policies, and when we start looking at these policies, having conversation, the awareness of it will change the way we react to these policies, which in turn will help stabilize our institution. Because our institution is not stabilized, is why a lot of foreign investors will keep on running away. There's the security risks, I know that, but these are the tiny details that can change that, which is also very fascinating here. In my proposed premise of this episode of having a natural disaster should disrupt agriculture, and one of the ways to really diversify our economy would be looking into agriculture, because for now, Nigeria population fast outgrow the rate of agriculture, which means we import the vast majority of our food. A poor economy like ours cannot really be sustained with vast importation like we do. So if I say a natural disaster is needed for our economy to be a little bit more stable, which is counterintuitive, how would that affect our agriculture? I would say, I believe it will affect our agriculture in a way that for every time a natural disaster happens here, we are going to suffer for it. But because we now know we are exposed to natural disaster, I do believe we would put things in place. Because our agricultural sector, as it is right now, does not use a lot of modern means of agriculture. And that's because we don't have a lot of foreign investors. The foreign investors do not trust Nigeria because of the branding issue, which is another part. I feel like, if we have natural disasters, our brand can be changed from scammers to victims, one. Then two, I feel there are other parts of Nigeria that we can brand for tourism. Nigeria has a lot of tourism, and we have a lot of means to diversify our portfolio, but we don't see a need to, because we are blessed, and that's the problem. Nigeria has it all. We are too blessed to be effective, and that's why we're suffering. So I'm thinking of ways to remove our blessing, to force us to be more effective. Of course, I'm not God, so I don't have the power to create natural disaster, but I do think we can think of more effective ways and work towards it. long-term policies. For one, and I'm going to say it again, the tax reform that has been everywhere is one of those good long-term policies because it incentivizes investors to want to take the risk if they are not worried about paying tax when they are barely seeing profits. In fact, right now, it's a business that is not seeing profit will not be taxed. And these are the kind of policies that should be passed. But it comes as no surprise that the policy was rejected by the Nigeria northern governors. And it's because the status quo there is the people in power controls the masses and they get most of the money. And since the northern Nigeria makes up the vast majority of Nigeria's senates and the rest, it also makes sense as to why they will reject any bill that does not favor them. But these are institutional problems that can be worked on. There are little tiny details that can be worked on. So this episode is just me talking about this. I'm just talking about this. And the reason I'm talking about this is, even though Nigeria seems like, okay, it cannot get any better, I do believe here, just changing the mindsets, changing the narrative is all. I would keep on saying it. Just changing the narrative of what Nigeria is can make a huge difference. Just changing that narrative. We don't need to start praying to God or just changing the mindset. Because when we change the mindset, we'll change the conversations being had. The awareness would change. And with this change in awareness, we'll change the kind of policies we are looking into. And this is why I still come to talk about stuff like this on the podcast, because it's just one-to-one conversation. Then we'll have that mindset and we'll have it with more people and the policies slowly change with time. Yes, our government mismanages most of our funds, but that mindset comes from the ground up. We've had that mindset because that's what we have always known. The corrupt government has always been a thing, and we ourselves feel like when we get into that position, we have to do the same, or else we are the one losing. But if we change that mindset, that narrative, we start holding people accountable little by little, it will move all the way to the top. That's my belief. It might be overly naive. I can be even critical of this belief. When I say other people with this belief, I am very critical of it. But I do think it's important to have beliefs like this because it makes you look into ways we can make a difference as opposed to wishful thinking. A good government, a good president might not necessarily make any difference if we don't have trust in the government. And the government don't want to lose control because they feel they have more to lose. But our policies can help. But yeah, that's it. I do think here that we need some way to scatter things up. When I was having this conversation with a friend, he said, imagine government that has not paid salary for months, and now you are saying, boom, earthquake happens and everybody is suffering, that we will all die. And I said, yes, we will die, but the few people that will survive next time will be a little bit more critical about who they vote for. And the point that we used to vote, the point that we used to hold people accountable when they are in office will change. And that's like the underlying premise. More research could have been done to like prove it as a point, but what's the point? What's the point in proving that we don't have natural disaster? The underlying issue in Nigeria is our institutions are very short-minded with the way they see money can be generated. They only think of the federal government and that. They don't really think of how they can generate their own income, and they don't really have an incentive to generate their own income because for the same reason, when you generate this income, the federal government takes it and spreads it across every other person. And it's like, why try to make more money for your state where another state that is doing nothing will get most of that money? So it's just the angle. So yeah, thanks again for coming. Do it to like, subscribe, and I see you again next week. Bye.